The familiar scent of warm bread and sugar filled the humid morning air of General Santos as Manny Pacquiao stepped out of his black SUV. The boxing legend had returned to his hometown for a quiet visit, seeking the simple comfort that only this place could provide. Years of international fame, championship belts and global recognition had never diminished his deep connection to these streets where his extraordinary journey began. Walking along the bustling sidewalk, Manny felt the weight of nostalgia settling over his shoulders like an old cherished blanket. The sounds of jeepneys honking, vendors calling out their goods, and children playing in narrow alleys created a symphony that instantly transported him back to his childhood. This was the General Santos of his youth, raw, authentic, and filled with the dreams of ordinary people working toward extraordinary futures. His security team maintained a respectful distance as he moved through the familiar neighborhoods. Local residents recognized him immediately, their faces lighting up with genuine pride and affection. Some waved from their small shops, others simply nodded with deep respect, understanding that their hometown hero needed these moments of peaceful connection with his roots. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete as Manny approached a small bakery tucked between a hardware store and a barber shop. The establishment looked modest, its weathered sign reading "Rosario's Fresh Bread" in faded blue letters. Through the glass window, he could see rows of freshly baked pandesal, ensaimada and traditional Filipino pastries that had sustained generations of hard-working families in this community. Something inexplicable drew him toward the entrance. Perhaps it was the authentic aroma that reminded him of simpler times, or maybe the quiet dignity of this small business that represented everything he admired about Filipino resilience. As he pushed open the glass door, a small bell chimed softly, announcing his arrival to whoever worked inside. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her hands, weathered by decades of honest work, carefully arranged pastries in the display case. She wore a simple floral dress covered by a clean white apron, her movements efficient and practiced. There was something profoundly familiar about her posture, the gentle way she handled each piece of bread, and the quiet concentration etched across her lined face. Manny stepped closer, studying her features more carefully. His heart began beating faster as fragments of distant memories started piecing themselves together like an old puzzle finally revealing its complete picture. The shape of her eyes, the particular way she tilted her head when focused on a task, the gentle rhythm of her movements, all of it triggered something deep within his consciousness. This woman had been part of his earliest years. During the most challenging period of his family's struggle with poverty, she had been the one who cared for him when his parents worked multiple jobs just to survive. She had been the one who made sure he ate, who comforted him during lonely afternoons, who told him stories that made him believe in possibilities beyond their circumstances. Remedios had been more than just a nanny. She had been a guardian angel during his most vulnerable years. She had worked for his family for almost no payment, driven by pure kindness and genuine love for a small boy who showed early signs of the fighting spirit that would eventually change his destiny. The recognition hit him like a powerful wave, bringing with it a flood of emotions he hadn't experienced in years. Here in this humble bakery stood the woman who had helped shape the foundation of the man he had become. The irony wasn't lost on him. While he had conquered boxing rings around the world, she had continued her quiet life of service, now feeding her community through the simple act of baking bread. Manny felt his throat tighten as decades of gratitude and love overwhelmed his usually composed demeanor. Remedios looked up from her work as she sensed someone approaching the counter. Her movements paused mid-motion when her eyes met those of the customer standing before her. The pastry she had been holding slipped slightly from her weathered fingers as recognition dawned across her gentle features. Time seemed to suspend itself in that sacred moment, bridging decades of separation with the power of unconditional love that had never truly faded. Her hand instinctively moved to her chest, covering her heart as if to steady its sudden racing. The young boy she had cared for with such devotion had grown into the man the entire world now knew and celebrated. Yet beneath the fame and success, she could still see traces of that curious, determined child who used to follow her around their small house, asking endless questions about everything from cooking to life itself. Manny felt his own breath catch as he watched the emotions play across her face. Remedios had been barely 30 when she first came to work for his family, a young woman herself who had chosen to dedicate her energy to caring for other people's children because she understood the sacred responsibility of nurturing young lives. Now silver threads wove through her hair like medals of honor, each line on her face telling stories of decades spent in quiet service to others. The memories flooded back with startling clarity. He remembered how Remedios would wake before dawn to prepare simple meals with whatever ingredients were available, turning meager resources into nourishing sustenance through sheer creativity and love. She had possessed an almost magical ability to make something from nothing, whether it was transforming leftover rice into a comforting porridge or finding ways to make their tiny house feel warm and welcoming despite its obvious limitations. During those early years when his parents worked from sunrise to sunset, Remedios had been his constant companion and protector. She had taught him to tie his shoes with patient repetition, helped him with his elementary homework, even though her own education had been limited, and most importantly, she had believed in his dreams when they seemed impossibly distant from their daily reality. Manny could still recall the afternoons when she would sit with him outside their small house, pointing toward the horizon and telling him that dreams were like seeds. They needed time, care, and unwavering faith to grow into something beautiful. She had never doubted his potential, even when he was just a skinny kid throwing punches at makeshift punching bags made from old socks filled with sand. The bakery around them seemed to fade into the background as both of them processed this unexpected reunion. Remedios had always possessed an innate dignity that transcended material circumstances, and that same quiet strength was evident now as she stood behind the counter of this modest establishment. Her choice to work in a bakery felt somehow perfect. She had always been someone who nourished others, whether through meals, comfort, or simply her steady presence during uncertain times. For Manny, seeing her in this environment felt like discovering a missing piece of his personal history. While he had conquered international boxing rings and achieved fame beyond imagination, she had continued her life's work of feeding and caring for people in her community. There was something profoundly beautiful about the parallel paths their lives had taken, both dedicated to service, though expressed in vastly different ways. The scent of fresh bread that filled the small space reminded him of mornings when Remedios would somehow manage to create breakfast from almost nothing, always ensuring he had something to eat before school. Her resourcefulness had been legendary among their neighbors, and her generosity had extended far beyond the boundaries of her paid responsibilities. Standing before her now, Manny felt the full weight of gratitude that had been building in his heart for decades. This woman had been instrumental in shaping the foundation of his character during his most formative years. Her lessons about perseverance, kindness, and maintaining dignity, regardless of circumstances, had traveled with him to boxing rings around the world, becoming part of the inner strength that had carried him through his most challenging fights. The recognition between them was complete now, transcending the need for words as decades of shared history and mutual affection filled the quiet space between them. Tears began forming in Remedios' eyes as the full reality of this moment settled over her. The boxing champion standing before her was the same little boy she had once carried on her hip when he grew tired during their walks to the market. Her hands trembled slightly as she absorbed the miraculous nature of this reunion, remembering how she used to wonder about his future during those long nights when she would check on him before going to sleep. Manny noticed the modest wedding ring on her finger, worn thin by years of honest work, and the simple cross necklace that hung around her neck, the same one she had worn when he was a child. Her faith had always been a cornerstone of her character, and she had quietly instilled those same values in him, through her example rather than through lengthy sermons or lectures. The other customers in the bakery began to notice the unusual stillness between the famous boxer and the elderly woman behind the counter. A middle-aged man named Izagani, who had been selecting bread for his family's breakfast, paused in his movements as he sensed the sacred nature of what was unfolding before him. The regular patrons of Rosario's bakery knew Remedios as a hard-working, gentle soul who always had a kind word for everyone, but none of them could have imagined her connection to their most celebrated hometown hero. Manny's gaze traveled across the simple interior of the bakery, taking in the worn but clean countertops, the modest display cases filled with affordable pastries, and the evidence of long hours spent in honest labor. This was clearly not a prosperous business, but rather a humble establishment that served the working families of the neighborhood with dignity and consistency. His mind drifted back to specific moments from his childhood when Remedios had demonstrated the same values he now witnessed in her current work. He remembered how she would spend her own meager earnings to buy him a small treat when his parents couldn't afford such luxuries, always presenting these gifts as if they were natural parts of her responsibilities rather than generous sacrifices from her own limited resources. There had been countless nights when she had stayed awake with him during childhood illnesses, applying cool cloths to his fevered forehead and humming traditional Filipino lullabies that seemed to possess healing powers. Her voice had been his comfort during thunderstorms, her steady presence his security when the uncertain nature of their family's financial situation created anxiety that even a young child could sense. Remedios had taught him practical skills that extended far beyond basic childcare. She had shown him how to fold clothes properly, how to organize their limited belongings to maximize space, and how to treat every possession with respect regardless of its monetary value. Her lessons about gratitude had been delivered through daily examples rather than formal instruction. She had thanked God for every meal, no matter how simple, and had found reasons for appreciation even during their most challenging periods. The boxing champion could see that same spirit of gratitude still radiated from her weathered features. Despite the obvious signs that she continued to live modestly, there was no bitterness in her expression, no resentment about opportunities missed or recognition unacknowledged. She had chosen a life of service, and that choice had apparently brought her a form of contentment that transcended material circumstances. Her current situation spoke volumes about her character. Instead of seeking to capitalize on her connection to his fame, she had continued living quietly, supporting herself through honest work while maintaining the same values that had made her such an important influence during his formative years. The realization of her continued humility and integrity moved Manny profoundly, adding layers of respect to the love he had always carried for this remarkable woman. Manny stepped closer to the counter, his heart pounding with an intensity that rivaled his most significant championship fights. The physical distance between them seemed to represent all the years that had passed since their last encounter, yet the emotional connection remained as strong as if no time had elapsed at all. His hands, which had delivered countless powerful punches throughout his career, now trembled slightly with the overwhelming urge to embrace the woman who had been such a fundamental part of his foundation. Remedios began removing her flour-dusted apron with careful movements. Her actions suggesting she understood the magnitude of this moment required her full attention. Beneath the practical work clothing, she wore the same type of simple, dignified attire that Manny remembered from his childhood. Modest, but always clean and pressed, reflecting her belief that poverty never justified neglecting one's appearance or self-respect. The bakery's other patrons had begun to recognize the boxing legend, but their usual excitement was tempered by the obvious emotional significance of what they were witnessing. Maricel, a young mother who frequently brought her children for morning pastries, quietly gathered her purchases and ushered her family toward the exit, instinctively understanding that this reunion deserved privacy and respect. Manny's mind filled with memories of Remedios' unwavering optimism during their family's darkest financial periods. She had possessed a remarkable ability to maintain hope when circumstances seemed hopeless, always finding small reasons for celebration even when their resources were at their most limited. Her resilience had taught him that true strength wasn't measured by physical power alone, but by the capacity to persist with dignity through life's inevitable challenges. He remembered how she would save tiny portions of her own meals to ensure he had enough to eat, always claiming she wasn't hungry while encouraging him to finish every grain of rice on his plate. Her sacrifices had been made with such natural grace that he had only understood their true magnitude years later, when maturity allowed him to comprehend the depth of her selflessness. The scent of fresh pandesal continued to fill the air around them, but now it carried deeper significance than simple nourishment. For Manny, it represented the countless mornings when Remedios had prepared whatever food was available with creativity and love, transforming basic ingredients into meals that sustained both body and spirit. Her resourcefulness in the kitchen had been legendary, turning simple rice and vegetables into dishes that somehow satisfied hunger while conveying profound care. Remedios' eyes reflected a mixture of pride and disbelief as she observed the man her former charge had become. She had always believed in his potential, But seeing the reality of his achievements standing before her created an emotional impact that was almost overwhelming. Her faith in his abilities had never wavered, even during those early years when his dreams seemed impossibly ambitious for a boy from their circumstances. The recognition between them had evolved beyond simple acknowledgement into something approaching reverence. For Manny, she represented the purity of unconditional love and support that had helped shape his character. For Remedios, he embodied the miraculous fulfillment of dreams she had helped nurture during his most vulnerable years. Their shared history created an invisible bridge spanning decades of separation, connecting the successful international champion with the humble woman whose influence had been instrumental in creating the foundation for his extraordinary journey. Unable to contain his emotions any longer, Manny walked around the counter with measured steps, his security detail maintaining their respectful distance while remaining alert to his movements. The champion's approach was gentle and deliberate, conveying deep respect rather than presumption, as he moved closer to the woman who had shaped so much of his early character development. Remedios' hands instinctively smoothed her simple dress, a gesture that transported Manny back to childhood moments when she would prepare herself to greet visitors despite their humble circumstances. Her innate dignity had always impressed him, the way she could maintain grace and composure regardless of external conditions. That same quality was evident now as she faced this unexpected reunion with the poise that had made her such a stabilizing influence during his formative years. The boxing legend noticed details that spoke volumes about her current life situation. Her shoes were well maintained but clearly old, polished with care but showing signs of years of daily wear. The small purse hanging beside the cash register contained the basic necessities of someone living on modest means: reading glasses with scratched lenses, a worn wallet, and tissues carefully folded for reuse. Behind the counter, Manny observed the efficient organization that reflected Remedios' lifelong attention to detail. Every ingredient was properly stored, every utensil had its designated place, and the workspace showed the systematic approach of someone who took pride in maintaining order despite limited resources. These observations reinforced his childhood memories of how she had managed their household with similar precision and care. The morning light filtering through the bakery's front window illuminated the silver in her hair, creating an almost ethereal glow that seemed fitting for someone who had been such an angelic presence during his youth. Her face showed the gentle lines that came from years of smiling at customers, comforting children, and maintaining optimism through life's inevitable challenges. Manny could see that Remedios had retained the same essential qualities that had made her so special during his childhood. Her eyes still held the kindness that had provided comfort during his moments of uncertainty, and her posture reflected the quiet strength that had made her such a reliable source of stability when his family's circumstances were most precarious. The bakery owner, an elderly man named Feliciano who had been observing from the back room, emerged with curiosity evident in his weathered features. He had employed Remedios for several years and knew her as one of his most dependable workers, someone who arrived early every morning and approached her responsibilities with unwavering dedication. The sight of the world-famous boxer treating his employee with such obvious reverence created a sense of amazement that he struggled to process. Regular customers like Lourdes, a schoolteacher who stopped by daily for her morning coffee and pandesal, had quietly gathered outside the bakery's windows. Word was spreading through the neighborhood that something extraordinary was happening inside Rosario's establishment, though the specifics remained unclear to those observing from the street. Remedios seemed smaller now than she had in Manny's childhood memories, but her presence remained just as significant. The years had added physical fragility to her frame, yet her spirit appeared unchanged from the woman who had once carried the responsibility of caring for him with such devoted attention to his needs and development. The champion felt an overwhelming desire to bridge the decades of separation with a gesture that would convey the depth of his gratitude and continued affection. Every championship belt, every international accolade, every moment of global recognition seemed insignificant compared to the simple joy of being reunited with someone who had loved him unconditionally when he was just a struggling child with impossible dreams. With tears now flowing freely down his cheeks, Manny gently reached for Remedios' weathered hands, taking them in his own with the reverence one might show towards sacred relics. Her fingers, roughened by decades of honest labor, but still possessing the gentle touch he remembered from childhood, trembled slightly at the contact. The warmth of her skin against his transported him instantly back to countless moments when those same hands had comforted him, fed him, and provided the security that had allowed his dreams to take root. Remedios looked up into his face, seeing not the international celebrity that the world celebrated, but the little boy she had once tucked into bed each night with stories about brave heroes who overcame impossible odds. Her eyes, now clouded slightly with age but still radiating the same unconditional love, reflected decades of prayers for his safety and success during his journey from their humble beginnings to global stardom. Unable to maintain any semblance of composure, Manny pulled her into a gentle embrace that seemed to compress all the years of separation into a single moment of pure connection. Remedios, despite her small stature, had once been his tower of strength, and now he found himself trying to be hers, his arms encircling her carefully as if she were made of precious porcelain that required the utmost protection. The embrace lasted several minutes, both of them allowing decades of unspoken gratitude and affection to flow between them without the need for words. Manny could feel her slight frame shaking with emotion, and he realized that this reunion was perhaps even more overwhelming for her than it was for him. She had watched his career from afar, celebrating his victories and worrying about his defeats, never imagining that their paths would cross again in such an unexpected way. Feliciano stood transfixed behind the counter, his own eyes moistening as he witnessed this extraordinary display of human connection. In his 70 years of life, he had rarely seen such pure emotion expressed between two people. The sight of the world's most famous boxer honoring his employee with such obvious love and respect created a profound impact that would remain with him for the rest of his days. Outside the bakery windows, a small crowd had gathered as word spread through the neighborhood about the unusual scene unfolding inside. Among the observers was Soledad, an elderly woman who had known Remedios for years through their shared attendance at morning mass. She watched through the glass with tears in her own eyes, understanding instinctively that she was witnessing something sacred and beautiful. The bakery's atmosphere had transformed completely from a simple place of business into something approaching a shrine of human love and gratitude. The morning light seemed brighter, the scent of fresh bread more profound, and the very air appeared charged with emotional significance that transcended the ordinary boundaries of daily life. Manny found himself remembering specific instances when Remedios had demonstrated the same nurturing spirit he now felt emanating from her embrace. There had been a particular evening when he had fallen and scraped his knee badly, and she had not only cleaned and bandaged the wound, but had also sat with him for hours afterward, telling him stories about brave young fighters who turned their pain into strength. Her influence had extended far beyond basic childcare into the realm of character formation. She had taught him that true victory wasn't measured only by defeating opponents, but by maintaining integrity, showing kindness to those less fortunate, and never forgetting the people who had supported him during his most vulnerable moments. As they slowly separated from their embrace, both of them wiping tears from their eyes, Manny felt a profound sense of completion that he hadn't realized had been missing from his life. This reunion represented more than just a chance encounter. It was a sacred reminder of the foundation of love and support that had made all of his subsequent achievements possible. The weight of his success now felt different, not burdensome, but purposeful, as if every championship had been won not just for personal glory, but to honor the faith that people like Remedios had placed in him from the very beginning. As the intensity of their embrace gradually subsided, Manny began to truly observe the environment where Remedios had been working, his eyes taking in details that spoke volumes about her daily reality. The bakery's equipment was functional but aging, the kind of reliable machinery that required constant maintenance and careful handling to continue operating effectively. The cash register was an older model, its buttons worn smooth by countless transactions, suggesting that this was a neighborhood establishment serving families who counted every peso carefully. Behind the display cases filled with fresh pastries, Manny noticed the early morning baking schedule posted on a simple piece of paper taped to the wall. Remedios' name appeared consistently on the earliest shifts, indicating that she arrived while the rest of the city still slept to ensure fresh bread would be ready for working families starting their days. Her dedication to providing this essential service to her community reflected the same selfless work ethic that had characterized her care for his family decades earlier. The boxing champion's security team remained positioned near the entrance, respectfully maintaining their professional duties while being deeply moved by the scene they were witnessing. These experienced men, who had accompanied Manny through countless public appearances and high-profile events, recognized that they were observing something far more significant than a typical celebrity encounter. Feliciano approached cautiously, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, as he processed the extraordinary nature of what was unfolding in his modest establishment. As the bakery's owner, he had employed Remedios for 3 years and had come to regard her as one of his most valuable workers, always punctual, consistently cheerful with customers, and possessed of an work ethic that inspired everyone around her. Through the front windows, the growing crowd included familiar faces from the neighborhood. Armando, a jeepney driver who regularly purchased his morning coffee from the bakery, stood with his cap removed in a gesture of respect for what he somehow understood was a sacred moment. Beside him, Minerva, a market vendor who had known Remedios through their shared morning routines, wiped tears from her eyes as she witnessed the obvious love and reverence being displayed. Manny found himself studying Remedios' workstation, with the same attention to detail he had once applied to analyzing opponents before major fights. Her apron hung on a simple hook, clean but showing signs of daily use. A small photo of the Sacred Heart was taped discreetly beside the time clock, the same religious devotion that had provided comfort to his family during their most challenging periods. The realization gradually dawned on him that while he had been conquering boxing rings around the world, accumulating wealth and international recognition, Remedios had continued living the same type of modest, service-oriented life that had made her such an important influence during his youth. She had never sought to capitalize on their connection or to leverage his success for personal gain. This discovery filled Manny with a profound mixture of admiration and responsibility. Her continued humility and dedication to honest work represented values that had helped shape his own character, yet her current circumstances suggested that life had not rewarded her sacrifices with material comfort. The irony wasn't lost on him that while he could afford anything money could buy, the woman who had helped make his success possible was still working long hours in a neighborhood bakery to support herself. The morning sun had risen higher now, casting longer shadows across the bakery floor and illuminating the dust motes that danced in the warm air. Customers who would normally be arriving for their daily bread purchases had gathered respectfully outside, sensing that something extraordinary was taking place and choosing to wait rather than interrupt this momentous reunion. Manny felt the weight of opportunity settling over him like a familiar fighter's robe. This unexpected encounter represented more than just a chance to reconnect with someone from his past. It was an invitation to demonstrate the gratitude that had been growing in his heart for decades. Without hesitation, Manny reached into his jacket and retrieved his phone, making several quick calls that would transform not just Remedios' life, but the entire future of the modest bakery that had become the setting for this miraculous reunion. His conversations were brief but decisive, setting in motion plans that reflected the same determination he had always applied to his boxing career, now channeled toward expressing decades of accumulated gratitude. Within minutes, representatives from his foundation were coordinating with local contractors to modernize the bakery's equipment, expand its capacity, and ensure that Remedios would never again have to worry about financial security. However, Manny's approach was carefully designed to honor her dignity. Rather than simply offering charity, he was creating opportunities that would allow her to continue the meaningful work she clearly loved while enjoying the comfort she had always deserved. Remedios seemed to understand instinctively that something significant was happening, though the full scope of Manny's plans would only become clear in the days to come. Her weathered face radiated a peace that suggested she had already received the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that the little boy she had loved and nurtured had grown into a man who remembered her contributions with profound appreciation. Feliciano watched in amazement as Manny explained his vision for transforming the bakery into a community landmark that would serve the neighborhood for generations while providing Remedios with a position of honor and security. The elderly owner had never imagined that his modest establishment would become the center of such an extraordinary story of love, gratitude, and remembrance. The crowd outside had grown larger as news of the reunion spread through General Santos. Among the observers was Isagani, a local reporter who understood that he was witnessing something far more significant than a typical celebrity appearance. This was a story about the enduring power of human connections and the importance of honoring those who had contributed to one's success, regardless of their social status or recognition. As the morning progressed, Manny spent time learning about Remedios' current life, her family, her dreams, and her continued dedication to serving others. Her stories revealed that she had never lost the optimistic spirit that had made her such a positive influence during his childhood. Despite facing her own challenges over the decades, she had continued to find ways to nurture and support the people around her. The boxing champion realized that this reunion represented more than just personal closure. It was an opportunity to demonstrate publicly the values that had been instilled in him during his formative years. By honoring Remedios so visibly, he was also honoring every person who had contributed to his development without seeking recognition or reward for their sacrifices. The transformation plans for the bakery would include a scholarship program for local children, managed by Remedios, allowing her to continue her life's work of nurturing young people while ensuring that her wisdom and experience would benefit future generations. This arrangement perfectly reflected both her skills and her passion for helping others achieve their potential. As their time together drew to a close, Manny and Remedios shared one final embrace that seemed to heal decades of separation and uncertainty. The love between them had never diminished, and this reunion had provided both of them with a sense of completion that would enrich the remainder of their lives. The impact of this morning would extend far beyond the personal lives of these two remarkable individuals. The story would inspire countless people to remember and honor those who had shaped their own journeys, creating ripple effects of gratitude and recognition that would touch communities around the world. The bakery on that humble street in General Santos had become the site of something miraculous, proof that love, gratitude, and human connection possess the power to transform ordinary moments into eternal memories that define the very best of what it means to be human.